Good morning. Today is the 17th day of Tammuz. It is also the 6th of July. And we're on page 148 of a Marimer from the Rebbe that we said summarizes a lot of what has to do with eating before prayer, and eating on Shabbat, and what the differences are, and so on. The topic we've been dealing with all week. This is the last day that we'll be in this topic, and tomorrow we're going to start probably what is the most important mimer ever written on the 3 weeks from Reb Hillel of Parich, who takes all the teachings of the Alter Rebbe, the Midler Rebbe, and the Tzemach Tzedek, and sort of puts them together into one treatise. It's called Ita B'Psikta. And it's a mimer that will change your whole outlook on the fast days, on these 3 weeks, and so on. And it gets into very, very interesting topics. It's been taught in the past in English, if somebody wants, by Y.Y. Jacobson. We're going to be doing it from a little bit of a different perspective. In any case, let's continue here. We said yesterday that the ta'anug that comes, ta'anug of the weekdays is murkav. It's composite. And what is it a composite of? Of wisdom and one's self-nullification, and the pleasure itself. The pleasure comes with something. So now he tells us exactly what does that mean. What exactly does it mean that they're composite? So it means that one is dependent on the other. On the 6 lines from the bottom, the last word. When the pleasure is composite with the external aspect of wisdom, so they remain two separate things. וכמו שאנו רואים שכאשר אדם ממציא שכל חדש, אזי מתענג על השכל, אבל כאשר השכל נתיישן אצלו, אינו מרגיש בו תענוג. And the way to see this is that when a person has a new insight, he has a new seichel, then he takes pleasure from it. But because they're separate things, the pleasure is not contained. It's not consistent. So when the insight is outdated, it becomes old, he no longer feels the pleasure in it. And from this we can see that the wisdom, or the insight that was gained from the wisdom, and the pleasure are two separate things. Why? If the pleasure would have been fully composite with the wisdom, then what we would have had was that we would have felt the pleasure in this insight always, eternally. The fact that it diminishes, one would think it's because the insight is old. What do you mean the insight is old? There's no such thing. An insight is an insight. X squared plus y squared equals z squared, Pythagoras' law of triangles, is always the same. It doesn't change. Why do you not get pleasure from it the second time, the third time, the fourth time anymore? The first time you may be very impressed. Because what is diminished is not the mind. The insight is still the same. It hasn't changed. What has changed is that the pleasure was not fully composite. It didn't become fully one thing. It didn't fuse with it together. So the pleasure has gone. You only got the pleasure when the insight was formed. But then it says, this is very, very interesting. This is one of the most beautiful insights to explain what does it mean that something is completely one with something and something is not. Because again, people tend to overlook this. They think, oh, it's old, so I'm not interested anymore. No, it's still the same thing you always had an insight about, except that now the pleasure is gone. The pleasure did not remain fused to the insight. This is all when the insight is from the external aspect of wisdom. מה שאין כן בפנימיות החוכמה, הנה פנימיות אב הפנימיות עתיק, שהחוכמה היא עצמה תענוג. But there's a different option, which is that they fuse together not with the external aspect of wisdom and the pleasure, but rather the inner aspect of wisdom. And that's what it means in the Zohar when it says Pnimiyut Abba, Pnimiyut Atik. Pnimiyut Abba means the inner aspect of wisdom, right? Because Abba is wisdom. So the inner aspect of wisdom is itself pleasure. They don't mean to say that these are synonymous. If it was synonymous, you wouldn't need both of them. What they mean to say is that if you have an insight from the inner aspect of wisdom, the pleasure will remain fused to it forever. It can't dislocate. So this is not an aspect of the pleasure now shining down on the wisdom. It is the pleasure itself. Because that's what the inner aspect of Atik means. And that's what we mean when we say that on Shabbat, the insight that you'll have will forever have pleasure associated with it, because it comes from the inner aspect of wisdom. So this in and of itself is a beautiful, beautiful explanation of first of all, the statement in the Zohar, because the statement in the Zohar is not usually understood. What do you mean? Pnimiyut Abba, Pnimiyut Atik. What are you saying? That there's like a tunnel from here to there? What do you mean? He says what the Zohar means is that they fuse and they become one. Okay. This is also the difference between the tzaddik who eats and the beinoni who eats, the righteous person who eats and the intermediate who eats. This we learned actually I didn't learn this with you. I learned this here with someone, but in Hebrew 4 or 5 years ago. It's a very important mimer. It's called Tzaddik Ochel Sov Nafsho. I think the Dibur Matchil is Tzaddik Ochel Sov Nafsho. So there's two verses that are quoted in relation to eating. By the tzaddik we say Tzaddik Ochel Sov Nafsho. The tzaddik eats and is to the satiation of his stomach, of his soul. About the other verses, Beten Reshaim Techsal, that the stomach of those who are wicked or who are not good is always empty, is always lacking. It feels lack all the time. What does that mean? That satiety, feeling satiated by food, this is very good for today, right? Is a question of whether you're a tzaddik or it's a question of your spiritual stature. And the idea here is Dinei Ktiv, because it says in Isaiah, "V'zarati bet Yisrael zera adam v'zera beima." Sorry, in Jeremiah 31:26. I will sow the seed of Israel in two types: zera adam, the seed of man, and the seed of animals. Those who are intermediate and less, they're described as the seed of the animal, meaning that they connect to their animal soul. Yeah, a Beinoni also. Because the Beinoni is in Bria Yitzira Asiyah. He's only in the 3 lower worlds. The tzaddik is the only one who's in the world of Atzilut. And the souls of the tzaddikim, they are called the seed of man. Vayifresh, again, this is an image that Jeremiah gives, and we have to unravel it. Vayifresh ben avodat haneshemot zer adam avodat haneshemot zer behema. Avodat haneshemot zer behema is avodat dedat tachton. Avodat haneshemot zer adam is avodat dedat elyon. The difference between them is in their divine service. The tzaddikim, the seed of man, they serve God with what we call supernal knowledge or supernal consciousness. And the Beinonim and below, they serve God with what we call lower consciousness. Now, everybody knows that lower consciousness means that what we see here is primary, and where it came from, the nothingness of God, of godliness. Nothingness again means that I can't fathom it. Doesn't mean that there's nothing there. This is not the nothingness of the East. The nothingness of the East is ontological. The nothingness of Chasidus is epistemological. It's about what I can know or can't know. So I can't know what the source is. I don't know what the origin is. The origin is always concealed from me. So the lower consciousness feels that the result, this physical reality which came out of that nothingness that I cannot define, it is primary. And the source, the nothingness, that is secondary. In other words, this is my first field of consciousness. This is where I function. I function here below. That's a Beinoni. And that's why that's why tzaddikim is so different. Because the tzaddik, what does he see? He sees the origin from which everything came. That for him is the first field of consciousness. That's where he functions. And then he has to function in our world. And I always told you that the best example of this is where Steindl says about the Rebbe, that the question about the Rebbe wasn't how could it be so holy. So the question about him was, how could he understand when somebody came to cry about money that they lost? Because it would be like you and me sympathizing for real with a child who came to us and said, my Monopoly money is torn. It's a game. It doesn't mean anything. But yet he was able to bring himself down so low, as a tzaddik, he can bring himself down so low so he can even understand a person who's living in the physical reality. So for him, though, it's an effort. He has to exert effort to understand how this physical reality works and why people are so taken in by things that happen here. In his reality, the most important thing is the origin from which everything comes. דאף שיודע ומרגיש אשר העין האלוקי הוא המחיה ומהווה את היש וכל חיותו וקיומו של היש הוא מעין אלוקי מקום כל קורא אותו בשם עין. So even though we understand that it is godliness, the ayin of the godliness that brings everything into being, still we call it nothingness still. Why do we call it nothingness? כי מה שהנברא אינו רואה קוראו בשם עין, because the thing I can't see or I can't understand, again, not because it's ontologically not a thing. It is a thing. But it's the most thing there is. But I can't see it. I can't understand it. So therefore I call it nothingness. Therefore, the level of self-nullification that a person who is seed of animal, who is a Beinoni and below, can reach is called bitul yesh, is the nullification of being. Yesh. Bad word. I don't know why I just translated it like that. I couldn't find the word. The nullification of the feeling of self. That's what yesh is. That's all he can nullify. But he can't nullify being. He can't nullify reality. He himself, as an individual, is willing to do what God says. That means the nullification of self. שהוא יודע שהעין אלוקי מהווה אותו משום זה הוא בטל אליו. מכל מקום, הביטול ביטול היש בלבד, והיינו שהיש נשאר במציאותו וישותו, אלא שהוא יש מי שבטל. So what is he saying? So this type of nullification means I still exist, but I'm nullifying my sense of self so that I can do what God tells me to do. But I myself still continue to exist. My being is still here. There's no difference in my being. So it's not the nullification of being. All this is called bitul yesh, the nullification of the feeling of self. So even when he loves God or fears God, he feels it's him who's loving God and fearing God, meaning he feels himself very strongly because it's only his sense of self that's gone, but not his being. Still, it's he who loves, it's he who wants to love God. מה שאין כן, יש מי שבטל, הרי מצד עבודתו הוא בביטול, מכל מקום ראה ביטול מצד עבודתו, דווקא בעצם הוא יש. So he says the difference between them is like this, that person who's completely canceled his being, so he doesn't say it's me who wants it. There's no me, there's no want. Rather, what is it? This is, I have no wants. I'm gone. I'm erased. That's nullification of being. But the person who's only nullification of the sense of self, he feels himself all the time. It's I who want to love God. It's I who want to put tefillin on. In fact, I can say, I need to put tefillin on. I need to go to shul. I need to do this, I need to do that. Just a couple of weeks ago, I took a group to the temple, the Western Wall tunnels, whatever. When we came out, I thought I was different already, but I'm not a tzaddik. So what did I say? I need to go daven mincha. Then I call myself, what do you mean I need to go daven mincha? It's I need? What do I care what I need? If I go to daven it's because I need, then that's nullification of the sense of self. That's all it is. And what should a person strive for? To feel that this is what Hashem wants from me, not what I need. And that already is a beginning. When you say, what does Hashem want from me? That's the beginning of feeling what a tzaddik feels. That it's Hashem who's doing everything, not me. So we won't have time to finish this, especially the part with the eating, unfortunately. And we're not eating today, so we have no problem. But we will eat, God willing, later today, and then we won't know what to think. But God willing. And tomorrow we'll start the new mimer.